Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Melissa Mann, and I'm the site administrator at Drakewell Museum and Park. I'll be your moderator and also a panelist for the evening. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with us, the museum is located in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and is one of the 21 historic sites owned by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and administered by the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. Drakewell preserves and interprets the site of the Drakewell, as well as historic Pithole City, oil's legendary boomtown, and McClintock Well Number 1, the world's oldest continuously producing oil well. Through these three historic sites, we chronicle the birth and the development of the petroleum industry in Pennsylvania and its growth into a global enterprise. We're very, very pleased that you've decided to join us for tonight's Pithole Person of the Year program. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, the Friends of Drakewell, Inc., for helping the museum to bring this program to you. Before we jump in, I just want to go over a few logistics for everybody, and I also want to introduce you to the team who will be bringing you tonight's program. Attendees, as I mentioned before, your cameras will remain off and your microphones have been muted for the duration of the program. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're probably going to hold questions for the Q&A period that'll follow the presentation, but we will definitely get to your questions. Please also feel free to use the chat feature to make comments or to converse with your fellow attendees. Amanda Slider, the Associate Director of the Friends of Drakewell, will be monitoring the chat, and she'll be adding some resource links for you later in the program. All right, so I am happy to have, as my fellow panelists this evening, my colleagues at the museum, Curator Sue Bates, as well as our museum educator, Sarah Goodman. We will be presenting the nominees for Pithole Person of the Year during two separate rounds. After each round, you, the audience, will have the opportunity to vote for the nominees in that round. The top vote getters for each round will move into a final vote for the accolade of Pithole Person of the Year. All right. So let's get started just with a brief history of Pithole City. So on January 7th, 1865, the Wildcat Fraser well struck oil on the Holmden Farm, which is located along Pithole Creek in Venango County, Pennsylvania. It was the first successful well outside of the proven areas of the Allegheny River and the Oil Creek Valley. And it really launched a second or maybe even a third oil frenzy. Thousands of people flocked to this really isolated area in Venango County looking to make it rich. Savvy businessmen named Thomas Duncan and George Prather purchased the Holmden Farm and they laid out 500 lots for lease and basically founded Pithole City. At its height, Pithole boasted 15,000 residents, 57 hotels, 3 theaters, an infamous red light district, a daily newspaper, the 3rd busiest post office in the state, and many, many more businesses. And it had a number of suburbs as well. Just grew and grew for about 500 or so days. But the boomtown declined almost as rapidly as it grew. The oil ran dry. A rash of fires decimated both wells and city buildings, and oil discoveries that were taking place in other locales started to pull people away. By December of 1866, Pithole's population had dropped to fewer than 2,000 people, and people just continued to leave. By 1877, the city's charter had been annulled. So today, all that remains of this once thriving city are cellar holes in a hillside meadow. But the boomtown's legacy really does live on in the very captivating stories of its diverse citizens, some of whom will be joining us this evening. So we're going to move into round one here. So we want to meet our first set of candidates for Pithole Person of the Year. Sue, we're going to start with you. Who is your nominee for round one?
His obituary, published in newspapers across the country, declared that he was one of America's most humorous paragraphists. Union soldier, store clerk, and writer, you'll see why Charles Leonard should be the Pithole Person of the Year.
Okay.
That's him on the left. That's him.
That is him on the left. Let's meet Mr. Leonard.
Greetings. My name is Charles C. Leonard, Crocus to my friends and readers. I was born in Ohio in 1843, and like most fellows back then, when I was old enough, I enlisted to fight in the Civil War. I saw some fearsome battles and lived through some fearsome conditions. Great survival training for living here. I was wounded at the Battle of Chickamauga and discharged, and the lure of the oil fields called to me. I've made my way to Pithole. Got a job at Eddie's Hardware as a clerk. Then started writing articles for the Pithole Daily Record on the side. Well, the editor liked my writing, and soon I was being paid to edify the public with my scraps of satirical wit about every ball, brawl, fight, fire, and festivity in this oily Eden. My description of the great foot race of '86 is a prime example of my eloquence and style. Since the great retreat of the congressmen at the Battle of Bull Run or the flight of Jefferson Davis, the Western world has witnessed no such running as that seen Saturday night on Homeland Street. The principals were Scotty, well known as Greased Lightning by the Pittsburghers, and Cowdrey, who was a descendant of Hiawatha via Tecumseh, and who, like his ancient relative, when he struck his gait, at each stride a mile he measured, hills and mountains left behind him. At 7 o'clock, everything was in readiness. The street was lined with people of every rank and condition. Pimps, bootblacks, fallen angels, newsboys, flowing well owners, dry hole speculators, etc. Every available spot where a view could be had was occupied. Here might be seen a Venus gazing from the upper windows of the Academy of Music, while right opposite, pensively reclining on the roof of a livery stable, could be seen Adonis, who was offering a second-hand chew of tobacco against the Maury Farm Hotel, but with no takers. The members of the press were stationed in the best positions, as close to the gin mills as possible. The champions were on the plank, attired in a thin veil of gauze, which showed their splendid, not overfed forms, and the gentle heaving of their manly bosoms could be heard by those residing in Balltown. First heat, both started with a handspring, Scotty on the inside with Cowdrey fast closing up and tearing up the plank awfully. Nothing could be seen of the runners except a streak of dust, a few planks, and toenails in the air. Cowdrey ahead this time. Heat the second, betting high and fast on both parties. Both start on a fair trot, which changes to a canter, and Pittsburgh wins. The third heat was pretty hot, all ground, running fast, betting slow, swearing excellent, etc. Scotty again the winner. The comments by the crowd were numerous and amusing. A subscription paper will be circulated today to defray the expenses of relaying the plank road torn up by the runners. And that was Pithole, as I saw it.
Reading historic newspapers can be boring, but not so with the Pithole Daily Record. Leonard's humorous prose captures the imagination. He gives a verbal painting of the streetscape, the wide variety of humanity that wandered its muddy streets, seeking out its entertainment and economic opportunities. Bidding over a wooden crate, 10 minutes later becomes a faro table with an active game in progress. His articles bring town to life. Writing under the nom de plume, Crocus, Charles Leonard published a history of Pithole in 1867. He quotes, "No town or city in the world has ever had so remarkable a history as that of Pithole. Its rapid growth, the amount of capital expended, and the fortunes realized here. Its numerous and monster wells have had no equal since the world began. Without Charles Leonard and his history of petroleum, historians would have the same difficulties which still presents itself when trying to piece together the history of any farm in the Oil Creek Valley. With much or all of the original documentation lost to time, there are only courthouse records or the occasional newspaper reference to use when trying to reconstruct the past. The details of the sale of the Morey farm would never be told by just looking at the courthouse documents. Charles Leonard gives us the details about the purchase of the tax stamps and how Marcus Morey's nephew came to his uncle's rescue and secured a couple of 100,000 more for his elderly relative. By publishing his history, we have a concise statement regarding the first producers, production companies, their owners, and their activities. We know who drilled the first well in the Thomas Holden, Walter Holden, Rooker, Copeland, and other farms in the neighborhood. That's more information than is available for anywhere else in all of oildom. We actually have the names of portions of a farm and know what company owned them. He provides the different names given to a well as it changed hands and who formed each company. With the Blackmere farm, Leonard gives the brief statement from the Pithole Daily Record, then fills in the story with the first-hand account. Details 21st century historians could never know. His description of individual important wells is wonderfully detailed. The Grant Well, Holden's 1 and 2, Pool Well, Eureka. His descriptions of the water wells in town that began to flow oil is a delight to read. How would we know the importance of the post office if it were not for Charles Leonard's descriptions? The second part of Leonard's history is pure crocus. Bits of truth mixed with the oily puns, exaggeration, and fantasy, or fancy as Leonard calls it. His humorous genius makes the history of Pithole fun and accessible to readers today. And that's why Charles Leonard should be Pithole's Person of the Year.
Very good. Thank you, Sue. All right, we're going to move to Sarah Goodman. Sarah, who are you nominating in the first round for Pithole Person of the Year?
I am nominating a former Civil War captain and chaplain and a family man and an all-around wonderful man, Reverend Darius Steadman, as my Pithole Person of the Year.
All right, let's meet the candidate.
Hello. For those of you who don't know me, allow me to introduce myself. I am Reverend Darius Steadman. I became a Reverend in 1857 at the age of 26 when the Erie Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church licensed me. I was soon appointed to my own congregation just a few miles away in Chippenville. I remember my calling took me into the Civil War. I joined the 105th Pennsylvania Volunteers and became a captain and a chaplain. While there, I contracted typhoid and was sent home to recover, so naturally, I returned to the ministry of the gospel. Now, I didn't fit the description of the typical reverend of the time. I wasn't clean-shaven, I carried a pistol, and I smoked a pipe. As you can imagine, this didn't sit well with those in the Erie Conference. However, they saw the need for the gospel to be preached in the oil boom town of Pithole and decided to send me. I shall never forget the first day I arrived. It was a Sunday in July. The year was 1865, and the town was bustling. Men were stumbling around, carrying on. The sound of music could be heard all throughout the town. People were gambling and working. As I continued to walk around town, there wasn't a church to be found, so I decided to use what was available, a stable. That was where I preached my first sermon in Pithole. I convinced the foreman to have his men spread the word around town that there was going to be a sermon. Folks stopped what they were doing and began listening to the word of God. To this day, I can't recall what the Lord gave me to share, but I was just glad to be his vessel. I began working on building a proper church for the people of the town to worship in. The very next month, the Lord moved and a local landowner to donate a piece of land. I was able to collect enough money through rewards to build the church debt-free by the first of the year. In Isaiah, the Lord tells us, "Look unto the rock whence ye are hewn, and to the hole of the pit whence ye are digged." We should never forget what we were before meeting the Lord, and that is why I encourage the workers of Pithole to come as they were, in their dirty work clothes and muddy boots. It may be hard to believe, but Pithole wasn't just filled with immoral men and women. There were families with children that needed an education. A group of oil well superintendents called 40 Thieves gave a Christmas present of $150. Of course, the Swordsman Club also donated just to keep up the reputation. Soon, the children were able to attend classes in the church basement. My time in Pithole is one I shall never forget. It was God's calling on my life to bring the gospel to the citizens of Pithole. I am reminded of a letter I received from the 40 Thieves commending my moral teachings, courtesy, and charity. Allow me to leave you with these words of the great Apostle Paul. "And now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three. But the greatest of these is charity. Love one another, and God bless." Thank you.
So I think he said it best. Well, maybe the swordsman said it best in their letter, that he brought morality and charity and education to Pithole. Others had tried. They came to Pithole to build churches and things and bring religion to the town, and unfortunately became corrupt, as the town was corrupt, and failed in their missions. But Reverend Steadman was able to stop the men on working and actually have them stop what they were doing and construct benches and things to get that first sermon going. And he was able to rally the people to start supporting education and to donate funds and things to bring that education to the children and things that were in town. So people started realizing, or he got people to recognize that there was a need in the town, and he got everyone to rally together to come to church, establish churches. And because of him, other religions were successful in developing churches in the town. One of Steadman's greatest things that he did, and his greatest contribution, was actually saving one young woman. The story is not told very often, but it goes that there was a young lady named Rebecca. That's the name that she goes by, but we're not really sure of her name. But her mother contacted Steadman and said that her daughter had responded to an ad by Ben Hogan to be a housekeeper. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case, that Ben Hogan was not going to be using her as a housekeeper, and he was holding her hostage and Reverend Steadman got this letter, and he was able to get some help, and he was able to go rescue Rebecca and return her to her mother. And I think that's something that says something great about him, that he was able to get people to help him to get this woman. And I actually read a couple places that some say that later in life that Ben Hogan actually reflected on what Steadman had said, and that he started doing better. So maybe he really truly changed Ben Hogan's view on life as well. So he brought morality, charity, and education to Pithole. So I believe he should be Pithole's Person of the Year.
All right. Thanks, Sarah.
Yep.
And I will make our final nomination. And I am very pleased to nominate New Jersey native and father of the modern pipeline, Mr. Samuel Van Sickle. So let's meet Mr. Van Sickle here. Maybe. There we go.
Samuel Van Sickle. I built the first commercially successful petroleum pipeline in the world. Now, prior to coming to Pithole City, I had been involved in a number of different businesses, most recently barrel manufacture. In fact, I came here with the idea of expanding that business and also possibly entering into buying and selling of petroleum. But when I got here, I found something radically different. The entire town, nay, the entire region, was under the thumb of the Teamster. For you see, every single day, several thousand barrels of oil had to be moved from here 5.5 miles to the railroad on Oil Creek. And that could only be accomplished with the wagons of the Teamsters, and they knew it. When oil was selling at $5 a barrel, they were charging $3 per barrel just for shipping. Why, something had to be done. Now, I'm from New Jersey, and I knew that of recent water had been pumped through pipes under pressure in some of the major cities. I would build a pipeline and do the same. I immediately sent for my good friend and most talented engineer, William Snow. Now, we found out other pipelines had been started. Some by siphon, others built by Hutchison using his invention, the rotary pump, which unfortunately vibrated and shook the pump so bad that joints came apart and they were doomed to failure. In fact, so that all talk of pipelines had been stopped several years ago, but I pursued. I got initial support from Wood and Olin in New York, and then I went to the largest manufacturer of pumps, Reed and Cogswell. And I told them that what I was going to do was build a petroleum pipeline. And when it succeeded, not if, but when it succeeded, it would create a vast new industry that they could be a part of. They immediately got on board with pumps and engines. Back in Titusville, I secured a loan of $100,000, and we set to work. Now, in the beginning, people thought that we were crazy, we were fools. Everyone knew you couldn't build a pipeline, but I persisted. At the beginning, the Teamsters let us alone, but as soon as the pipe started going in the ground, they decided it could be a threat, and so much of what was done during the day was destroyed at night. So much so that I had to hire armed guards to protect the pipeline. But even with that, in 1 month's time, we laid 5.5 miles of line. We installed 4 engines and pumps along the route, added a telegraph line so that we could monitor functioning of the pipeline, and on December 10th, after testing at 900 pounds, the oil flowed. And from the very beginning, our 2.5-inch line would move as much oil in 24 hours as over 300 Teamsters, and not at $3 a barrel, but at $1 a barrel. And that started the flood. Very shortly, there was another pipeline company starting a pipeline down along Pithole Creek to the Allegheny River and the railroad there. Another was started to Titusville, and a whole new industry was born. An industry born because I had an idea. I followed up. I built a pipeline. Not only was it not affected by weather, at a lower cost, thus providing lower lamp oil to the homes of those in the cities, on the farms, to the miners. Samuel Van Sickle, pipeline builder.
See, he's totally awesome. I think the case for Mr. Van Sickle is really simple. He single-handedly cemented Pithole's legacy with his successful pipeline. Without Samuel Van Sickle, Pithole is really, it would have been an interesting and an entertaining story like any other oil boom town, but it wouldn't have been as historically significant as it is. This boom town holds vast significance, importance to the history of the industry because it was the site where Samuel Van Sickle's pipeline revolutionized the transportation of oil. Oil really is worthless unless unless you can successfully convey it to market. Pithole proved to be the greatest transportation challenge that the infant industry had really faced in 1865. The Wildcat wells of the Pithole field shifted production away from the very, even basic infrastructure that existed in the Oil Creek Valley. There were no rail lines to Pithole. There weren't any streams in the area that were suitable for moving oil via a pond freshet like they were doing on Oil Creek. And really at its height, Pithole was producing 6,000 to 8,000 barrels of oil a day. And prior to Van Sickle's pipeline, the only way to get it to market was to haul it by wagon, which was an extremely slow process over roads that weren't in great shape to begin with, and that just continued to deteriorate into this just swamp of oil and mud because of the endless wagon trains that were traversing them every day. Van Sickle saw that Pithole was producing more oil than could be hauled by wagon. And he had a vision. He knew that a pipeline would improve the efficiency of transporting oil to market. On its first test, the 5.5 mile pipeline moved 81 barrels of oil in an hour. It would have taken 300 wagon teams more than 10 hours, or working 10 hours straight to accomplish the same feat. One contemporary account called Van Sickle's pipeline, quote, one of the most wonderful of the many wonders produced at Pithole, end quote. And other oil men of his time, his contemporaries, were eager to replicate his success. Within 5 months of Van Sickle's first test of his pipeline, 7 additional pipelines had been constructed in the region, and they altogether had the capacity to move over 15,000 barrels of oil a day. Now, some folks would claim that while Van Sickle revolutionized the transportation of oil, that he really did a disservice to Pithole's largest class of workers, as well as to the city's economy, essentially by eliminating the need for Teamsters. I would argue that this is an overstatement. Van Sickle's pipeline did not immediately put 3,000 Teamsters out of business. Yes, initially it put 500 Teamsters out of work, but the first pipelines were not directly attached to the tanks that were at the well site. So as a result, Teamsters were still needed to haul oil from the well to the pipeline dump station. The demand for Teamsters didn't really disappear until the spring of 1866, when accommodation lines were constructed to connect those well tanks to the pipeline dump station. And by that time, by the spring of 1866, oil production was already in decline, and Pithole's demise was underway. I'll conclude by saying this about Van Sickle. With his successful pipeline, he created one of the petroleum industry's foundational technologies. Much like Edwin Drake's drive pipe, Van Sickle's pipeline was revolutionary, and it had far-reaching impacts. Today, hundreds of thousands of miles of pipeline crisscross the United States, carrying crude oil and natural gas and refined petroleum products. And in fact, in 2019, we moved 1.7 billion barrels of crude oil across the United States. Of that amount, 1.5 billion, or just less than 90% of that crude oil, was moved via pipelines. Today's pipelines are much bigger. The technology has evolved really beyond anything anybody in Pithole could have ever imagined. But at the heart of the enterprise of moving oil via pipeline today is Samuel Van Sickle's vision and his achievement. And that's why I think that he should be named the Pithole Person of the Year. All right, so just to recap for everybody, our round 1 nominees are Charles Leonard, Pithole's prolific storyteller and historian, the Boomtown's moral compass in Reverend Darius Steadman, and the father of pipelines, Samuel Van Sickle. Now it's going to be time to cast your vote. I'm going to launch our poll here. You will be, the panelists are not able to vote because that would just be unfair. But we're going to let you all vote. You have you will only be able to choose one person. So I'm going to launch this poll now and give folks a few minutes to start voting. All right, going to give folks a few more seconds to get their votes in. All right, and I am going to end the vote. And with 46% of the vote, Samuel Van Sickle moves out of round one and into the final vote. Thank you, everybody. Yay! All right. Now we're going to move on to round two. Now, while round one featured, really 3 men who achieved really prominent status in Pithole society, round two is going to be a little bit different. We're going to highlight citizens who may not have held or had high status, but who nonetheless played a significant role in building and shaping the Pithole community. So we're going to go ahead and meet our second set of candidates for Pithole Person of the Year. And this time we're going to start with Sarah. Sarah, who's your nominee for round two? And you're going to have to unmute there.
Sorry, not very good at unmuting. My candidate is probably a very little known person, someone who actually is supposed to not really be seen, someone who is supposed to do their job and go unnoticed, and that would be the chambermaids. Those that kept the places clean and neat and tidy.
Let's meet a representative of Pithole's chambermaids.
Oh, you caught me resting my bones. I get so weary this time of day. Cleaning hotels is hard work, but it's a grand hotel, isn't it? With its wraparound porch and its gleaming white paint. It's a wonderful place, but it's awfully big. Fortunately, we don't get very many of those muddy Teamsters, or I'd be cleaning the stairs all the way up to the 3rd floor. And we get quite a crowd. Inside there's a large lobby, and with the crowd just gathering, waiting for the dining hall to open. We've got a large staff here at the Danforth House. We've got a full kitchen crew, and there's only a few of us maids. We get a lot of speculators, as opposed to Teamsters. Last week, we even had some fancy English gentlemen with their gold ties, gold pins in their ties, and the airs they put on made quite a show. Fortunately, I don't have to do the sheets. Poor Mrs. Thatcher, she ends up having to use the benzene to get the grease out. But the lye soap does a good job of getting the grease off the doorways and the door handles. Here at the Danforth, we only sleep 2 gentlemen to a bed generally, sometimes 3. Unlike those other places downtown, some of them sleep 5 to a bed. And then one crew comes in, and then another crew goes out, and another crew comes in, and the beds don't even have time to cool down. And they change the sheets maybe once a week. No wonder they have bugs. And fortunately, I've got Charlie. You know, that nice black man. He's told me horrible stories about life in bondage, but he's free now. And he carries the slop jars downstairs for me. I could never do that. That's way too heavy a work. We don't throw them out the window the way they do down at the Chase House. No wonder they've got flies down there, that end of town. So, speaking of work, I best be back to it.
She looked awfully familiar.
She did look very familiar, didn't she? So chambermaids are amazing, usually very young women. A lot of them were sent to find work by their families that needed support. And a lot of these young women would come to boom towns like Pithole to seek out wages and things and send those wages home. You think of the hardship that they put up with, working in these hotels and things with the men, and being young and not probably knowing much about the world and the ways of the world, and having to do all this hard work cleaning. I mean, even the non-Teamsters men had to be dirty. I mean, their boots, anybody who walked in Pithole had dirty boots, and all of those dirty boots coming through the lobbies and things, and trying to keep the carpets clean and trying to keep everything presentable. These women, they were lucky in that being chambermaids, it was a safe alternative to some of the other job opportunities in Pithole. So that's a good thing for them. And these women also brought a little bit of stability and morality probably to Pithole, because maybe some of the men saw them as sister figures and would treat them with respect and be good around them and behave themselves around. We can hope that. And I think these women also probably helped out by going to church and helping out with the education of children too as well. So I think they brought a little bit of morality as well, along with Reverend Steadman. And I think chambermaids are really important. You have to give them a lot of credit, leaving their families to find work, supporting their families and keeping themselves going. They had to be strong women, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for that.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Sue, we'll go to you next. Who is your nominee for round 2?
Well, Civil War veterans, local farmers, and any young person who could handle a team of oxen or horses. These made up the army of Teamsters that clogged the roads leading from and to Pithole. So my candidates for People of the Year.
All right, let's meet the Teamster representative.
Howdy, folks. Name's Elijah Myers. Came to Pithole from Armstrong County, Pennsylvania. You see, I was drafted into Company L of the 14th Pennsylvania Cavalry when I was just 18. Short time later, I was thrust into the heat of battle and saw things I wish I could forget. But don't care to discuss that now or ever again. I took a rebel bullet in my right arm there at White Sulphur Mountain and returned to my family farm to recover. It was hard to adjust to life back on the farm when I heard of the oil boom in this town. I got a team and wagon and set off to become a Teamster in Pithole. Well, that was 6 months ago, and I learned soon after I arrived that most of all 3,500 Teamsters here were fellow veterans. And many things here are just like they were in the Army. Ex-privates still do all the hard work, and ex-officers run the businesses in the town. If you don't know by now, you'll realize that people in my line of work are the lifeblood of this here city. Only resource here is oil, and everything else must be brought into town by Teamsters. Without us, oil would never get to the rail line, and there would be no food or supplies. We haul over 1,000 wagon loads a day, loaded each way over horrible roads, in rain, axle-deep mud, snow, and ice. Given the conditions and need, ain't it our right to charge what we can? Some people talk about our rough ways, drinking, swearing, gambling, and the time we spend in the dance halls, concert saloons, and with the lovely ladies of First Street.
They don't seem to recall that we work long, hard days. We survived the war, and whiskey here is cheaper than water and safer to drink. As for the rest, I don't think we need to discuss that and what we do with our hard-earned time and our hard-earned money. Us Teamsters and other Civil War vets around town keep the city going, money flowing, businesses open. And we use the skills we learned in the service to get things done. And what thanks do we get? Old Sam Van Sickle comes to town here and tries to run us out of the town for his fancy $1 a barrel pipeline. Is that the way to repay us for our service to this great country? Well, we have plenty of experience fighting for what we believe in, and we're going to do it again. A big group of us have been busting up his line at night. Reckon we'll wear him down soon. Old Van Sickle hired armed guards to keep us away, but we've been part of the cavalry charges straight into cannon fire. And we fought hand in hand with our mortal enemies and looked upon the battlefield of thousands of dead and wounded. Few guns won't scare us in the least.
All
As
right.
Elijah said, they were the lifeblood of the town, and not only of Pithole, but of Meredith and Miller Farm as well. Oftentimes it took all day just to get from one place to the other. Again, that's about 5 miles by pipeline, but by roads is longer. And the road down into the Miller Farm, where the town of Meredith was, is a steep, steep hill. And there's mud and mud holes the entire way. But that $3 a barrel, which the Teamsters were making, didn't go all just into their pocket. Imagine all the repairs that they had to endure with their wagons going over those rocks, boulders, and mud holes, not to mention the life and care of their horses. Horses need to be fed, and the wagons need to be steered around those mud holes for fear that the horses themselves would get mired, buried, injured, and possibly die. And then there goes half their year's wages to replace the horse. They brought a lot of money, in spite of all of their expenses, into the community. And as Elijah said, they also brought in all of the goods sold by the stores. They brought in the chandeliers that filled the fancy hotels, the beds, the furniture, all of the things that made a hotel, plus all of the goods sold by all the other businesses. So Van Sickle, boo, not only led to Pithole's demise, but also Meredith and Miller Farm. For the local farmers, traveling to another boom town to find new work might be difficult. So it led to children going hungry. Bad Van Sickle. But that's, the Teamsters did move on elsewhere, those that could, and boom towns continued to keep happening, and they would continue to find work until there would be railroads or until pipelines replaced them. But I vote for Teamsters as People of the Year.
All right. Thanks, Sue. And I'm going to round out these nominations for the second round. I am very pleased to endorse the washerwomen of Pithole as the People of the Year. And I would very much like you to meet the widow Ricketts, who is an excellent representative of these women.
Hello, and welcome to Ricketts Laundry. I clean your clothes without cleaning out your wallet. The business is running much faster now that I've been able to hire an assistant and purchase more modern equipment, and it's all due to that well over yonder. I'm just a poor widow trying to make ends meet when that well started pumping 100% Pennsylvania crude. It all started on February 1st, 1866. Around midnight, a fire broke out. at the Syracuse Hotel on Holmden Street. Well, I have one of the very few water wells in the fine city of Pithole, so the bucket brigade came to my well and formed their brigade to help fight the fire. But my well is only 16 feet deep, so it didn't take long for it to go dry. When I went out in the morning to check my well, I still didn't have any water, but I did have oil. Well, I grabbed every wash tub and bucket I had. Then I went to the bank, withdrew my savings, and purchased empty oil barrels. That well would fill a barrel in 10 minutes. At the end of 4 days, I had 50 barrels sitting on my lot. Well, and oil wasn't the only thing that came rushing in. I was offered up to $5,000 for my well, but I refused. I also refused 14 marriage proposals, all from fine, upstanding oilmen who only wanted to take care of this poor widow. Well, what I did do was subdivide my lot into 20 6-foot square plots. I leased them for $500 each, sold every one of them, except for the one that had my well. Well, this went on for about 5 weeks when all of a sudden my well started pumping water again. So I went back to doing laundry. Of course, now I had a nice fat bankroll and, like I said, modern equipment and my assistant. Oh, and if you're here for your laundry, it'll be ready on Tuesday. Thanks for stopping by.
All right. Yep. The widow Ricketts was a lucky, lucky woman. There isn't a great deal of detail in the historic record about the individual washerwomen that were at Pithole. We have the widow Ricketts and her rags to riches account. But most of these laundresses, they remain quite anonymous. When contemporary records do talk about them, do mention them, they really do so to highlight the profession, that rather than the actual person. However, despite the fact that we don't know their names necessarily, or their ages, or perhaps their race or their ancestry, or a myriad of other personal details that we would love to know, we still can tell a lot about them simply by looking at the environment in which they did their work. The main reason that I think washerwomen deserve to be the person of the year, the people of the year, is that no matter the challenge, it seems they got the job done. Washerwomen did what needed to be done in order to ensure the survival of not only themselves, but their families. In the 1860s, this is a time when established gender norms said that women and their delicate sensibilities meant that they were only suited to be homemakers. And while many women agreed with this, what it said really was that women couldn't be successful in a public profession. And like I said, some women agreed with this, and they were wholeheartedly on board. But Pithole's washerwomen really proved that this theory was categorically false. Most of them probably went into the laundry business because they weren't financially stable, right? Whether their husbands or their sons weren't bringing in enough money, or perhaps like Mrs. Ricketts, they were widowed. Their backs were against the wall financially, and in order to ensure that they were stable, they bucked the system, right, in order to survive. And along with going into this profession, they provided a significant service for the people of Pithole, and they did it under exceedingly harsh circumstances. So Sarah described this pretty well when she was talking. So let's just set aside the fact that Pithole wasn't exactly the safest place for women. When it came to cleanliness and sanitation, Pithole probably ranked below a manure pile. And that is probably doing a disservice to cattle. It's, the streets were just a constant quagmire of oil and mud and worse things. The city had no sewage disposal system. So people either dumped their garbage and their other waste in the woods, or they simply tossed it in the street, which our maid talked about, right, with the Chase house. One visitor to the boomtown said, quote, "The whole place smells like a camp of soldiers when they have the diarrhea," end quote. It was terrible. We sometimes we have this, pretty picture of this Wild West boomtown, but it was a terrible, stinky, smelly place. And it was dirty. And as you can imagine, all of that filth ended up on people's clothes, and it ended up in their bedding and on their other washables. And the washerwomen were the people who had to take care of this stuff. And to add insult to injury, these women had to remove that filth in a place where water was extremely scarce. It was scarce, and the people who did have water sold it at exorbitant prices. So some laundresses, like Mrs. Ricketts, were lucky. They had a water well on their property, on their lease. But not all the washerwomen were that fortunate. Either they had to pay the Pithole City Waterworks or water company for exorbitant water, or they had to hike their laundry down to the creek and do it there. So it was tough work. But and I think that they're so admirable, because I think that to be able to do that under these circumstances shows that they're just extremely resourceful, that they're determined, and that they're just strong-willed, to get the job done. So that is why I think that the washerwomen of Pithole, as the person who's in charge of the laundry at my house, that's why I think that they deserve to be Pithole's People of the Year. So that rounds out our second round of nominees. Just to recap, we have the women who cleaned the boomtown's 57 hotels and boarding houses, Pithole's chambermaids. We have the 3,000 men whose strength, will, and sturdy wagons transported Pithole's oil to market, and in the Teamsters. And finally, the women who endeavored to keep the people of Pithole clean and looking presentable, the boomtown's washerwomen. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll. And again, you'll have one person or one vote to cast. Let me pull up the poll here. Right. Give everybody a few more seconds. All right, we're going to end voting. And with 56% of the vote, the winner of the second round is the chambermaids. Congratulations, chambermaids. So what we have, so the race for the Pithole Person of the Year has come down to the father of the modern pipeline, Samuel Van Sickle, and those women who who just worked day in and day out from dawn to dusk, cleaning up after all of the oil men of Pithole, the chambermaids. Sue, Sarah, any surprises? Yeah, I thought for sure it would be a Teamster Samuel Van Sickle fight at the end. But any predictions on how this final vote's going to go?
I vote for chambermaids.
As the person who
All
cleans
right.
my house, chambermaids.
Chambermaids. All right. I am going to actually, I need to put the final poll together, but while I'm doing that, I am going to, well, if I can find him, there he is. I'm going to bring on board here David Dubois, who is the president of the Friends of Drakewell, to say a few words, and then I'm going to put this final poll together now that we know who our two candidates are, and we'll launch that so that folks can make their final vote. Hi, David. You're muted there.
Thank you, Melissa. And first of all, I want to say thank you to all our participants that have joined us tonight. What a great event that's been put together by the staff. Our panelists, Melissa, Sarah, Sue, great job. All of our nominees, outstanding performances. Thank you to all. And also a lot of work went on behind the scenes with the staff of Friends of Drakewell, as well as the PHMC staff to be able to bring this together. So we want to just take this time and thank them all. I found it very interesting as we went through the program this evening, especially the second half of the program, how many people it took to put together such an exciting time in history. The laundresses, the chambermaids, the Teamsters, all part of the community, a huge community that Pithole was at the time. You know, and it's kind of like where we are today as a community of people and volunteers and participants to be able to participate in events like this. As again, I want to say as the president of the Friends of Drakewell, thank you to all. I would like to ask Amanda, who's been also doing a lot of the work behind the scenes, if you'd like to just put up maybe in the chat or in the Q&A a link to where anybody that's participating tonight would like to donate to the Friends of Drakewell so we can continue to put on these wonderful programs. We certainly would appreciate it. So again, thank you all for your time this evening. Thank you for agreeing to sit in and vote. I know I'm getting ready to cast my vote, Melissa, whenever you're ready to put up the poll. So thank you all and have a great evening.
All right. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. I'm going to launch the final ballot here. After we have our, we announce our person of the year, Sue and Sarah and I are happy to take questions. We have I see a few questions in the Q&A. So stick around. If you have questions, we would definitely like to talk to you. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. Who is your choice for Pithole Person of the Year? Give it a few more seconds. We have a couple people who haven't voted. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And this is so very cool. With one vote, with a win of one vote, Chambermaids of Pithole are the people of the year. Congratulations. Good job, Sarah. Oh, that's so cool. All right. All
Thank
right.
you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us and for voting. Really appreciate that. I'm now going to pull up some of these questions here. Let's see. All right, we have a question about who the actors are who portrayed our fantastic characters or historical figures at Pithole. And I would like to echo David and giving a big thank you to Sue Bates, who played our chambermaid. Thank you, Sue. And to the rest of our folks who were actors, are fantastic volunteers. We have such a great core of volunteers who are dedicated to the history of our site and to the success of our sites. And they just go above and beyond for us. Art Jennings, who played Samuel Van Sickle, Israel Power, who played the Reverend Steadman, James Schreffler, who portrayed our Teamster, Mary Ellen Stump, who was the Widow Ricketts, and Bill Stump, who portrayed Crocus, Charles Leonard. So thank you, so many thanks to them. We cannot do what we do without them. Question: was Steadman successful because he was not a, quote, traditional minister?
I think he was, maybe, because he was, I mean, he said it, they said it tonight, that he had the beard and he smoked a pipe and he didn't look like a traditional man. I think that probably made him a little more relatable to the men that were there. So I would say yes. I mean, but who knows? My research into him really didn't say that, yes, that's definitely why people, listen to him and things. So, but I think it was because it made him very approachable. He wasn't dressed as like a priest, stood out. He kind of blended in as one of the guys, but he wasn't one of the men.
He did a stint in the Civil War, correct?
Yes, he was.
So he served, and maybe that had something to do with it as well, right?
Yeah, because he could exchange stories with the guys about things, and made him.
Well, he was also an active evangelist, evangelical. I mean, he went out into the streets and talked to people.
Yep.
And invited them in. You don't hear about the Father Finucane doing that so much, and certainly don't hear about the Presbyterian minister doing that.
Right.
So active outreach, active participant in the community, the one and only school. So of course, all the families are going to support him in the church. And the fact that the church continued to have a worshiping congregation into the 20th century, long after the town died, I think is also a testament to the foundation created by the Reverend Darius Steadman.
Yep.
Any other questions out there? A few logistical questions. I always think that the debate between Teamsters and Pipeline, it's one of those really, just it's a compelling, right? Because it's one of those stories that we can relate to, right? Because most of us, most people work, right? And the idea of new technology coming in and taking your livelihood, and how frightening that can be, how angry that can make you, but also how do you not roll with change, right? It's the eternal question, right, of progress. Is progress always a good thing? And every time I think about Pithole and kind of that clash between Teamsters and the Pipeline folk,
Well,
it's
some of the wealthiest oil men started as Teamsters. Wesley Chambers, I forget if it was John Gailey or John Guffey or James, whatever, but one of them started as a Teamster. Chambers ended up being an incredibly wealthy producer. And there's numerous other examples where they found new professions like P.C. Boyle did. He was a Teamster at Pithole.
Yeah.
Ends up going off and doing all sorts of different things.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Guffey and Gailey were the Pennsylvanians that went to Texas and drilled Spindletop, which opened up the Texas oil boom. And really shifted oil from Pennsylvania to Texas. But let's see, got a couple more questions here. Let's see, because we are inquiring minds at our house, were there Jews in Pithole and or a synagogue?
No synagogue that we know of, but one, I believe he was a dry goods merchant, actually advertised as the Jews' store. And then he later moves to Titusville. So continues to be a very successful businessman. And I'm sure he wasn't alone.
And there was a synagogue in Oil City, and there was a synagogue in Titusville.
Yep.
Yeah. Another question here. Did the Teamsters continue to find work moving goods in and out of the town? Not everything can go by pipeline.
I'm sure some did, but the railroad was also active by 66.
Yeah.
So by then, merchants could get their goods via railroad.
Right.
But you still need to get it from the railroad to the town. So there was still some business activity. But by then, Petroleum Center had started to boom, Tittiyute area. So a lot of them just moved.
Yeah. And the pipelines weren't necessarily covering, enormous distances like we think today, right? They're, 5.5 miles from Pithole to Miller Farm. I think one of the others was, what was it? Pithole to Harry's Bend there on the Allegheny.
Oleopolis.
Yeah, and Oleopolis. And that was what, like 9 miles maybe? So not huge amounts. So, but, just the amount of time it took them to get from, to get that 5.5 or 9 miles. A lot of work. Another question we have here is, any idea of Van Sickle's net worth? Actually, interestingly enough, Van Sickle is just like our Colonel Drake. He dies penniless. He did not patent or wasn't unable to patent any of his pipeline technology. And he also, he goes on later to really spearhead continuous refining instead of kind of revolutionizes refining in that way. Instead of batch refining, it moves into, with his technology, into continuous refining. Unfortunately, while he had vision, he did not make any money from those visions, or at least none that accumulated. But yeah, he was much like Edwin Drake. Did good work, got no money. Let's see. Were the banks in Pithole like the other banks in the area and printed their own money?
I don't think so. I think they were all branches of other banks. I've never heard of any Pithole currency.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing any. All right. Any other questions, folks? All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you from all of us. I'd like to thank the staff and all of you for coming out. And again, all of our volunteers who helped us put this program together. It was a lot of fun. Pithole is always so interesting. Please, if you enjoyed this program, we are already preparing for a November virtual program, which will be on Thursday, November 19th. We will be joined by our colleagues from the Erie Maritime Museum and the Pennsylvania Military Museum. And we will be presenting a panel discussion, a panel presentation called Revolution, How Black Gold Transformed the Military. We're really going to be looking at how, exploring how oil revolutionized military operations from the industry's birth through the present day. You can register now on our Facebook page if you are interested, and we hope to see you all there. Thank you so much for coming. We really enjoyed having you. Thanks, everybody. Good night.